20 years ago, we had students who were very average. So on the PISA scores, we were in the middle of the pack. A lot of countries were outperforming us, a lot were underperforming us. The universities would say to the schools, you're doing a terrible job preparing the students. The business community said schools are terrible, do something, fix them. Parents were starting to pull their students out of the public schools and looking for private schools because they were not satisfied. The politicians blamed teachers. And last but not least, teachers had very low self-esteem. It was not seen as a good profession to go into. 20 years ago, today, this is what Ontario looks like. Our students are performing better than any other English-speaking country. We are also just behind countries like Singapore, Finland, and South Korea, despite the fact they are homogeneous societies. Almost everyone there looks the same, speaks the same language. We have a very diverse country. In the province of Ontario, 27% of the students are immigrants. In Toronto, 53% of the students go home to a home where English is not spoken. English is their second or sometimes third language. Yet they are performing better than any other English-speaking country. The universities are satisfied, the business people are satisfied, the politicians are off our back, and teachers feel empowered. So what's happened? Yeah. Can you close the door there? Because the noise from your translation is... Okay, I think that's better. Thank you. So the question then is, how did this happen? Was there some magic that happened? There's a lot that occurred. The government provided leadership and changed policies and curriculum and set very high expectations. And there was a huge focus on leadership. Leadership at all levels, including teacher leadership. Just out of curiosity, how many in here are classroom teachers right now? Great. How many are principals? Fantastic. Leadership for both those groups and everyone beyond. So I used to be a principal. I became a superintendent where principals reported to me. We were all expected to demonstrate leadership. OISE, our university, provided the key research, the key government advice, and the key training of teachers. The chart on the left-hand side shows what happened to our elementary students in the last 10 years. The government administers performance-based assessment in grade 3, 6, 9, and 10 in literacy and mathematics. For elementary school students 10 years ago, only just over half of the students were meeting the provincial standards. Now, almost 3 in 4 of our students are meeting these very high standards. The high school dropout rate on the right-hand side, you can see that we have improved from just over 60% of our students graduating to 84% last year graduating. Those of you that are coming in late, if there aren't enough handouts, the handout will be on the website, the Queen Rania Teaching Academy website. I want you to think right now about a teacher in your life that made a difference for you. You have 5 seconds. Is there a teacher that changed your life? I'm hoping positively, but it might be negatively. Turn to somebody beside you and give just one characteristic of that teacher. What was one thing about them that made a difference positively? Oh, no. Oh, yeah. No, I'm not going to ask because everybody might want to say it, but share it with her. Okay. If I had a lot of time, I would have you write on pieces of paper around the room what those characteristics were. And it would be interesting to see what are those characteristics that made a difference. Because that's what we want our teachers to be demonstrating. That's part of leadership. And I would say, I'm guessing, that for many of you, it wasn't that they were experts in science or mathematics, but more that they made a connection with you and they got you excited about learning. And they supported you in a way that made a difference for you. I have a question for you. Do you believe all students can achieve high standards given the right time and support? Boy, you are a great group. To be honest, if you had asked me that question 20 years ago, I would have said no, not possible. And some of you, if you're honest, will be saying, Evelyn, you know what? I don't really believe that. Let me tell you something. In Ontario, almost every teacher and every school principal honestly believes, given the right support and the right time, every student can achieve their maximum potential. We believe that. And that has been the driver. We also believe that every teacher can teach to high standards given the right assistance. When I walked into being a principal, I had some teachers on my staff, and I was told, good luck. You know what? I worked with them. They weren't superstars, but they ended up being good, solid teachers. They needed the right pressure and the right support. The same way when you're a teacher, you give pressure, you set expectations, and you also support. This is a really interesting slide. Canadian teachers in one of our provinces in the West, in Alberta, were involved with Norwegian teachers. Now, Norwegian teachers have very different beliefs. You'll see in the yellow bar across that students learn best by finding solutions on their own in math. Canadian teachers say yes, they believe that 82% of the time. Norwegian teachers believe it only 52% of the time. How do Norwegian students do in math compared to Canadian students? Not very well. When we look at the PISA scores, there's a dramatic difference. If you look at some of the other things about my role as a teacher is to facilitate students' own inquiry, my goodness, they're almost exactly the same. The most interesting differentiator is what they believe about their kids' ability to learn. I keep turning this thing upside down. Okay, let's try it again. The research, and again, the first two are out of OISE. We know that 75% of student achievement is based on the classroom teacher. If you're a principal in here, you can affect the instruction, the achievement of your students about 25% if you are an instructional leader. If you're not an instructional leader, just get out of the way because it doesn't really make any difference. All teachers are school leaders? No. I would argue they should be. And if they're not, if I walk in and this is my class, and this is like a Jordanian class, I'm getting close to 50 students in here. If I'm not a leader, you're going to chew me up and spit me out. Okay? I'm going to lose control. I am not going to have the learning happen that I want for you unless I am a leader. You need to follow me to some extent. I need to set the vision, the targets, and I need to help point you in the way that you're going. We believe in Ontario that a new teacher is a leader in these dimensions and more, but these are some of the critical ones. We hire teachers who know about instructional practice. How do you teach science? How do you teach math? How do you teach visual arts? Not just what do you know about science, math, and visual arts, but how do you teach it in ways that are engaging for students? Student assessment. How do you know a student can read at a certain level? How do you know that a student is struggling with some aspects of fractions in grade 4? How do you establish a school culture? I have walked into schools where if a student walks into a classroom and they're late, the first words out of the teacher's mouth are, "Why are you late? Did you sleep in this morning? What's wrong with you?" As opposed to, "Are you okay? Did something happen at home? Are you well?" Okay, there's a whole different approach. The culture matters. And good teachers, teacher leaders, are student advocates. They champion their students. I have very little time today, but this is a story that I think is very powerful, and it ties back to what you believe. I ended up teaching a student in high school who, when he first came to Canada, came from a very, very poor family. No father, a mother, younger children. And he was very shy, and he hadn't been educated well in his country. So he went to a school for very slow learners. But the teachers there said, he's smarter than you think and he can do more. So they put him into another school for better learners. And the teachers there said the same thing. We think this quiet boy can do more. When he came to my school, some of us said, we think this boy can go to university. Not only did he go to university, he went to one of the better universities in the country, studied education, and is now a teacher. What does that say? It says teachers who are student advocates and who believe in their students can make a difference. It's an amazing role that you have. Oh, I'm doing this. This thing is upside down. Okay. If you're an experienced teacher and you're sitting in here, I would argue that you're a teacher leader. You have everything that a new teacher has, but more. Have you been mentoring another teacher, a new teacher in your school? We have a huge program in our province that's formalized, and every teacher, when they begin teaching, has 2 years with an experienced teacher. The experienced teachers get courses on how to mentor. And if you want one of these courses, you can come to the University of Toronto anytime and get it. Experienced teachers deliver professional development. They do workshops after school or at lunchtime. They share what they know. They develop school-based resources. So if you're doing a unit on whatever the topic is, they help other teachers develop those resources. Some of you in here may be thinking, you know what, I want to be a school leader in a different role. I want to be a principal someday. I would argue that you need to have a good grasp of curriculum, and you need to understand it in subject areas that may not be your subject area. I was a high school phys ed teacher, health and physical education. I didn't know much about English, teaching English, but I became an expert. I visited classes and I learned from my colleagues and I asked good questions. If you want to be a principal, you should be thinking about school-based decision making. Can you ask to get on a committee? Does your principal allow you? And if you're a principal in here, I'm hoping you're allowing your principals to help you make decisions about where you spend your money, what resources you buy, who teaches what subject. In Canada, teachers make those decisions with the principal. And lastly, community leadership. Teachers that want to be principals should have strong partnerships, not just with parents, but with other organizations. So it's not uncommon for teachers in Canada to build relationships with museums, with universities, with business, with sports teams, anything that gets money and people into the school. And we were talking over lunch. Some of you have huge challenges. One teacher, 45 to 60 students. That's hard. That is hard work. You need more adults in your schools. You need to find ways of getting educated grandmothers who maybe can give you some time. I'm serious, because we do this in Canada. And we give them the kids who are struggling, or the kids that need more attention. We've asked university students to come. We've had partnerships where we have a program in Ontario high schools where students gain credit in high school for going out into the job world. Slow down, I'm sorry. So what I'm suggesting is, can you get high school students who may be interested in being teachers to come in and work with your very youngest children? And maybe it's after school. But there's an opportunity to do something where you, again, support those kids. John Hattie, a New Zealand, a Kiwi, has done a meta-analysis of over 1 million pieces of research. And he's published that. He's got a book out about visible learning. And he has about 150 variables that he looked at. And he said, what makes the difference for kids in the classroom? He found that in terms of what schools do, there was only one thing that had a negative impact. Anyone know what it is? Student retention. Failing children actually harms student achievement. It was the only thing that schools do. Things like television and other things outside of school have a negative impact potentially, but in terms of what we do as educators, that was the most damaging. What was the most important thing? And by far, the most important thing was number 1, student self-reported grades. What does that mean? If you were my class and I came to each one of you and I said, how do you think you're going to do this year? You would tell me. And you know what? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The way you think you're going to do is the way you're going to do. Kids in Asia think they have to work hard and they'll do well in math. Kids in North America think math is hard, I'm not going to work. Okay? It's what you believe. So I would say to you, remember what I said? What you believe matters? Because what you believe matters gets translated to what kids believe matters. And if they don't think they're going to be successful, they won't. We also know from the research that for every year a student takes mathematics, they hate it more. So if you're a math teacher, you have to ask yourself that question. What is happening in math classes around the world that kids hate math? Piagetian programs, you don't ask a 4-month-old baby to run a marathon. You might ask a 15-year-old to run a marathon. What we do in classes has to be age appropriate. I'm not going to go through all this list or all the 150, but I recommend John Hattie's research to you. You can find a lot of this by just Googling his name on the website or on Google. Michael Fullen, kind of the person that put our university on the map, has said that teachers strong on content and pedagogical knowledge and who care deeply and have moral purpose about learning and students are more effective. You are here today because I believe you want to be better. You have moral purpose and you want to make a difference. The research is clear that when you have those pieces and that moral purpose, you will be successful. He said a lot of other things. He's written a lot of books. Sometimes in Canada, we get cynical. We say, oh, what's his latest book? He's so many books out, but he has a wealth of information about what really happens. And we have applied Michael Fullen's work in our country, and I think that has been a huge factor in our success. Okay, in the packages that you have, and this is very much like a skeleton. If you open it up on the left-hand side, you'll see what's almost like an agenda. There are 4 things in Ontario and in Canada that have made a difference. Engaging students, professional learning communities, a focus on improving the lowest achievers, and differentiated instruction. If the translator tells me I'm not speaking too quickly and I keep going, I hope that when we finish this, we can get to what was advertised in the program, and that's around action research. But I have so much I want to share with you, so I'm being honest. Back home, this could be like a week-long course, and I'm trying to put it into an hour and a half. So it's a tease, okay? I'm just raising your curiosity. We believe students need to have input. There aren't any more, unfortunately, into their own learning and their own assessment. If you were in my class and I were to say to you, my goal for this lesson was that all of you walk out those doors believing that all kids could be successful. That's my goal. That's my big idea for this class. I would then say to you as my class, let's construct together a criteria that you would feed back to me about how successful I have been. So in small groups, which you're not going to do today, you would work and you would give me criteria, then we as a class would put these criteria up and we would decide which of them were good criteria. And sometimes in education we do rubrics, so we go level 1, level 2, level 3. Everything does not have to be a rubric, okay? It does not have to be. It can be a checklist. It can be smiling faces. If a child's 5 years old, it can be like a smiling face, a neutral face, a negative face. We have children who are 4 and 5 years old who are co-constructing criteria for their learning with their teachers. And again, if I had time, I would show you that piece. If you write this down, I'm sorry I don't have it on a slide, EduGains. If you Google EduGains, and that's spelled EDUGAINS, and Ontario, our province, ONTARIO, you will get to our Ministry of Education website where there are so many amazing videos. Now, I'm going to warn you. You're going to look at those videos and you're going to say, oh yeah, in Ontario, they only have like 25 or 30 in the class, not like I have. Set that aside and look at what the teachers are doing and what the kids are doing. And you will see best practice in an ideal situation. So again, I would have shown you some of those clips, but you can go there on your own time, with a good cappuccino in your hand and enjoying the sunshine. One of the things that we have found engages students are questions. And again, we could spend a whole day just talking about questions. Questions that students need to ask themselves. If they're going to be reflective on their learning, if they're going to take ownership for their learning, they have to be able to ask questions like, where do I want to go? Where am I now? How will I get to where I want to go from where I am now? And you may think, oh yeah, Evelyn, so, these are questions. I'm going to give you another story, a true story, of a school, and this was not in the city, it was in the country with a lot of poor farmers, not well-educated parents. The school test scores were always terrible. People didn't want to go to that school to be a principal or a teacher because it was hard work. It was hard work. One principal, Jill Marr, said, I want that school. I want to go to that school. Within 3 years, that school was just as good as every other school in the province of Ontario. She believed that kids could learn given the right support. One of the things that we do in Canada, and I know it sounds strange, but most of the best principals and most of the best teachers want to teach in areas where the kids are poor. Interesting, because in many other places, you don't want that. You want to go where you have beautiful buildings, kids coming to school who've had breakfast. We have schools where half the kids come to school and they haven't had breakfast. And sometimes they don't have lunch with them when they come either. Okay, so Canada is not everything you see on the television. Okay, we have a very diverse population. So we know that kids who ask these questions are responsible for their learning. A friend of mine went into that school, the Jill Marr School, and as she was talking to students walking up and down the rows, a couple of kids said to her, when she asked them, tell me about what this school is like. They said, we're the boss of our own learning. They'd taken ownership for their own learning. It wasn't the teacher, it wasn't their parents, they were responsible for their own learning. So inquiry, you hear that word here around this conference a lot. It means different things to different people. But one of the things it means is more than just asking questions and getting a right answer. Sometimes, the question matters. And I'm going to skip that slide. Yeah. Sorry. This is just a cycle. If you're going to do inquiry, you ask the questions, you investigate, you create, reflect, and discuss. And as I said, I could spend a day and a half on this. So if I'm going too fast, slow me down. Please interrupt me. These are some of the questions we ask students. What are you learning and why are you learning it? We ask young children, 4 and 5 years of age, the same questions. Is what you are learning easy or difficult? What makes it easy or difficult? Do you know how to improve your work? And I say that to you as a teacher. Do you know how to become a better teacher? Do you? If you're a principal, do you know how to become a better principal? Do you know what a good teacher looks like for you or what a good principal looks like for you? What makes learning interesting? What engages you? And where do you get help from when you're unsure? Who helps you? I'll be honest, a lot of the times, my daughters will tell me, they're both in university now, they get help from the smartest kid in the class, not from the teacher, because the teacher's too busy. Okay. If I was a high school teacher teaching Macbeth, I might ask you the question on the right-hand side. Describe the character of Macbeth, giving examples to justify your description. That's a very traditional question. We call that a thin question, a bad question. Thin questions are not good questions. We want thick questions. On the left-hand side, here's a thick question. Pick a minor character from Macbeth. How would this minor character describe Macbeth, and why would they describe Macbeth that way? It's a very different question. You're asking the students to put themselves into the play. You're asking them to infer. You're asking them to justify. You're asking them many other things too. But one of the things we do is we work with our teachers to help them develop thick questions, things that make students stretch academically into new places. So maybe a takeaway for you, because I think there's a lot you might want to think about, is what are some questions you asked? And these are questions not only for teachers, but for school leaders who are principals too. When you're talking to your staff, what kinds of questions do you ask? Are they thick questions? Teachers need to be provocateurs. They need to provoke kids to want to learn. Question for you, and I'm going to make you work because I've been talking for a long time now. Think of a provoking way to engage student interest in a lesson on global warming and climate change. I'm going to give you a chance to either by yourself or with somebody close to you, think about, and I'm only going to give you about 30 seconds, how would you get kids interested in that topic? Go.
I'll tell them that plants migrate as animals. They will just say, yeah, exactly. Look like this. How do plants migrate? I'll tell them, look at the Lord of the Rings. They migrated. They just walked. By this, I'll just go into the seed dispersal and how seeds are like just dispersing north because of the weather changing. And that will be the post.
Okay, 2 more and we'll go.
Yeah, I will ask them about the last time that a man was flawed. What? Drawing, maybe. But I will ask them to talk about the raining in Amman and what happens and why they are thinking about this.
So, you know, maybe you get extreme weather, right? So you get snow or not snow.
I'm gonna show them a video about how dangerous it is. Maybe I'm gonna show them a video about how dangerous it is.
Great idea. You stole my idea. Did you see this already? Okay, so you might want to play the movie by Al Gore, An Inconvenient Truth. Before you talk about anything, you just show them the movie. Or you might take pictures of Antarctic shoreline over the last 100 years. You can get all of this through the internet and ask students why they think the geography has changed and why might this matter to them. Okay, so you're living in Amman. You're living in Beirut. You're living in Toronto. So who cares about Antarctica? Really? Does it matter? Some will say maybe no. Maybe others will say yes. Okay? Now, I'm going to move us on because part of student engagement, we talked about provoking, asking questions. Another thing is the actual structure of the lesson plan. So in the package that you have, there's what we call in Ontario the 3-part lesson plan. Part 1 is getting the kids engaged. Minds on, getting started. There are all these buzzwords. If you go to another part of Canada, they'll call it something else. If you go south of the border, our American friends will call it something else. Basically, it's getting your attention. So how did I do that today? Maybe not very well, but I told you the story of Ontario 20 years ago and now. Okay, I asked you to talk about a teacher that you knew. We should have spent more on that, but that's one way of getting people engaged in or interested in what might be happening. The main part of the lesson, the action and assessment, is what we traditionally think of as teaching. This is where whatever the big idea or the goal of the lesson is taken up in the class. And then the third part is the consolidation and reflection. This is where the teacher and the students try to say, so what? What does that really mean? Where are we? Why was this important? What did we learn? Where does it take us next? What was still not clear? Now the template I gave you, the example, when the students come to the University of Toronto and they want to learn how to be teachers, we give them this chart. And I'm just sharing with you something that might or might not be helpful, because I don't know how you do your lesson plans. But at the very top, you'll see the big idea. What is it that you're really trying to do? When you walk in as a teacher, you need to know what that is. If you're a principal and you're walking into a class to observe a teacher teaching, it should be pretty clear to you what the big idea is. And if it's not, that's a problem. Question. Was that a question? No? Okay. Again, if I had the time, I would put you into groups and I would make you work, okay, to come up with this. But I'm going to spare you. You have to begin with the end in mind. And we talk about this in education. That's backward mapping, right? We have the expectations, we have the goals, and then you backward map. If I want to know how to sail a boat, if that's my goal, I don't know how to sail a boat, I have to say, what am I going to need to be able to learn to sail? Can I just read a book? Maybe. Do I need a boat to go out and sail? Do I need a teacher to teach me? You know, do I need a lake? Whatever it is, like you figure out. And you know, I might learn to sail on a nice quiet little lake. I might not want to go out into the Dead Sea or in the middle of the Indian Ocean the first time I learned to sail, right? I might actually put my sailboat into a very quiet little place. We plan the learning. We plan the learning. But it's from the goal in mind, and we stage it and we scaffold it. One of the huge pieces, if you look at the left-hand side, you'll see in the agenda, if you want to call it that, is professional learning communities. And we know from the work of the Dufors, which has been around for a very, very long time, that magic happens when you put teachers together. Now I'm thinking, back in my Jordanian school, with my 45 to 60 students, you got to be kidding me. Like, when am I going to talk to the rest of the teachers? When I sit down at the end of the day, I'm exhausted. When I have lunch, I hardly have time, to catch my breath. So when am I going to do this? Okay, this is one of the things I think you need to fight for. There are things we say in Canada, they're walls you go up against that you just, this is worth the mountain I'm going to die on, we say. This is the thing I'm not going to give up on. I would suggest that one of the things that's really critically important is having at least one other person in your building that is your co-learner, because you as a leader have to be a learner, and you cannot do it well by yourself. You can, but it's much more powerful if you do it with somebody else. In Ontario, every school has professional learning communities. We had a group visiting from Denmark, and they were in a high school. And high schools traditionally, the principals tend to be more removed. They're big buildings, lots of students, school safety, has somebody done something stupid in the hall, is somebody trying to sell drugs on the street. That may not be a problem here, but in Canada it can be. So there are other issues besides curriculum that the principal has to deal with. So we were in the middle of this meeting, and we knew that there were lots of questions. It was going along well. All of a sudden, the principal says, "I'm really sorry. My professional learning community is starting in 5 minutes. I'm going to have to go." And he left. That was a priority. It was more important than the international delegation. He had to be with his learning community. 20 minutes later was the end of our meeting. And the two vice principals said, we're really sorry, we can't stay any longer because we have our professional learning communities. Now, what do they do in these professional learning communities? They just don't sit around and have a coffee or tea. Typically what happens is they look at the challenges or the issues. Like, what is it that's not working? And how do we know it's not working? In Ontario, we have data. We have tests. We have teachers who are trained to do identification of students who are struggling. So I'll use a very simple example. If in my school I know that students are struggling with in mathematics, they're not doing well on problem solving, which has typically been an issue in mathematics. If you're just looking at plain arithmetic, where it's adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing in elementary schools, kids in Canada aren't too bad at that. But if you give them a word problem and say, now solve this word problem, whoopsies, it gets hard. And suddenly kids struggle. So if that's something you know, what's a professional learning community going to do to address that? Here's something of what it might look like. And some of you may have examples that are much better. Teachers would get together and they'd share just what I've shared. Yes. Do we see patterns? Are they certain kinds of word problems? Certain kinds of math? Are we seeing more problems with girls or boys? Are we seeing more problems with kids who are struggling with English as a second language? We would ask a lot of questions and gather that information so we have a big picture. Once we have the big picture, we would then say, okay, based on that, what do we know from the research? So for example, if the kids who are new to Canada who are struggling with English are doing badly while the native-born English speakers are not, it's a language problem. It's not a math problem. So we need to be looking at what are we doing when we're teaching English as opposed to the math. One of the things we sometimes look at is when are the children born? Kids come to school based on age, and there's always a different age. And what we have found that kids that are born in the last 4 months of the calendar year and who are younger struggle more because developmentally they're just younger. And in Canada, if you're born on December the 31st, you're in one grade, and you're born 3 minutes later at midnight, you're in the next grade. So, and it happens everywhere. And so those students we know struggle. So what do we do as teachers or as schools to support those kids? That's the kind of discussion a professional learning community has. They go deep. They analyze it and they go, now what does this mean? They ask lots of questions. The community typically, in a good professional learning community, if it's an elementary school, typically it would be maybe we call it the primary division. Those responsible for the children who are 4 to 8 years of age, and then maybe those are responsible for the children who are 9 to 12. In very large schools, we have some schools where we have 1,000 children in kindergarten alone. There's one school like that in Toronto, big school. Now it's a school just for kindergarten children. Almost all of them are Muslim children from Pakistan and India who have come. And they all live in apartments, and they're like 5 families in a 1-bedroom apartment, all pretty much well-educated parents. Kids do pretty well, and I'm diverting here. But the community, the professional learning community would be the classroom teachers, the English as a second language teacher, the special education teacher. We have people who are not teachers. They're called educational assistants that are in the schools. So these people usually have some training in early childhood education. They would be there. The principal or vice principal would be assigned to the team. And they would meet on a scheduled, regular schedule. We don't get parents. No, parents are not included, typically. Sometimes, when I was a superintendent, so I had a family of schools. I had 26 schools that reported to me. The principal would say, Evelyn, we want you to come in to this meeting because they would want to brag. They want to show off the level of sophistication. These are teacher leaders. Look at what they've done. Look at the research that they're doing. It's research. It's action research. They're asking questions. They're gathering the data. They're analyzing it. They're looking at the research that exists in the universe, and they're making changes to their practice. But other times they say, Evelyn, come in because we're struggling. We've hit a roadblock, we can't get by it. One of the issues we have in Ontario now around reading and writing is that we have moved the majority of our students, more than 3/4 of our students, are meeting our provincial expectations. They're doing really well. But we can't seem to get more of them doing really well. Like the 25% that are close just can't seem to get there. And of the 75% who are meeting it, we haven't been able to get many more to the highest level. Like we want more going all the way up. And so we're asking ourselves some very hard questions. Like we can sit back and go, oh, aren't we good in Ontario? You know, look at our PISA scores. Yeah, but you know what? There are kids that are still struggling. We cannot just be so proud and complacent and arrogant that we think we've got it. We haven't got all the answers. Every school is different. You can go from school to school, and you'll have different staff, different culture, different kids, and so it's different. So those are professional learning communities. The research is pretty compelling that they make a difference. The second line, the ultimate goal is improved student achievement. That's why people meet. And I would say to you, if you cannot meet physically with somebody, can you at least have an online buddy that you can dialogue with? Again, maybe there's somebody that you work with, but during the day it just doesn't work that you can get together. And set a realistic target. When I walked into my first inner city high school, poor kids, underachieving kids, I walked in to look at the curriculum, there was nothing. It was garbage, basically. And so here I was, a young teacher, 24 years old, working with other 24-year-old teachers, and this was a long time ago, the earth was still cooling, dinosaurs still roamed when I was doing this, and, yes, and what we decided to do is, we said, okay, we're gonna split the curriculum up. There were 5 of us. We're all gonna take a piece, we're all gonna develop resources. We became a professional learning community. We got together once a month. That's all we could afford because we were coaching, we were doing all kinds of other things. And we would share, okay, this is how much I've written. Take a look at it, what do you think? And after we'd finished writing it, after a year, we rewrote the whole curriculum, 9 to grade 12 in our subject. We said, now we're gonna start teaching it. And when I have a spare, when I have a period off, or if my lunch is different than your lunch, I'm gonna come and watch you teach. Now the union didn't like that very much. We have a very strong teachers union, and they said, whoa, 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 whoa. Teachers are not supposed to evaluate each other. We said, we're not evaluating each other. We're supporting each other. So I would teach this new curriculum, and my friend would come alongside and say, and ask me questions. Whoa, that was pretty good. But why didn't you do this? Or have you thought about that? Or you know what? This part doesn't work at all, does it? But we all owned it. And then the next day, I might go and watch her teach. And I'd give the same kind of feedback, because we were, in a sense, a professional learning community. So as I said about 10 minutes ago, I would say fight to find at least one person that you can have that kind of relationship with. Another piece, it's the third one down on the list of 4 on the right-hand side when you open up the brochure in front of you, is around equity. Now, equity means a lot of different things, but it primarily means providing a caring, inclusive, safe, and accepting environment. When you walk into a school where you have children from 57 different countries, when I was a superintendent, I had a high school where we would put the flag up for every country represented by a student. So when you walked through the front door, there were the flags hanging from the ceiling. We had 57 flags. And sometimes we couldn't find the flag because there were countries in Africa that had just formed and they didn't have flags yet that we could buy in Canada. But it was important that we recognize the fact that kids had come. Now, you know, as Canadians, we think we're perfect, right? Canada's a land where everybody is loved and everybody's accepted. Well, that's almost true. But we believe our schools need to have that culture. When Yugoslavia went to war, back in the early 1990s, we would have children sitting in our schools, Croatians next to Serbs, next to Bosnians. Their families back in the homeland were trying to kill each other, but in our schools, there was peace in the valley. It was harmony. So people said, how'd you do that? How did you do that? Well, government policy said every school board and every school must have a policy for how to deal with it. A policy that says we believe that everyone has a basic human right and everyone is included and everyone is respected and everyone deserves to be safe. But not only do you need to have all these nice sounding policies, you need procedures. How does it happen? You can develop all the policies you want. It's not going to make one bit of difference. You need to have ways to make it happen. The other thing was that in every single document, whether you were teaching physics or kindergarten, you had to say, how are you going to make kids feel that they are valued? That's not easy. Every single course in every single grade. And then the school culture. So, we would have members of the community come in so that people could see themselves. So we would have people from the mosque come in. We had prayer rooms established, which was a big thing when it first happened. Because, the Christians would say, whoa, what are these prayer rooms? You know what? The Muslim students need to pray. We will have prayer rooms. It wasn't an issue. We tried to hire teachers that looked like the students. So just north of Toronto, we have schools where virtually every child is from India or Pakistan. Every child. There's not a white child in the school. So can you imagine walking into a school where all the teachers and the principal are white? No. So what does that school board do? It tries to hire people that the kids can say, relate to, and they feel valued. And I almost took the bottom one off the list. It's controversial even in Canada, but these are the things that we believe everybody has the right not to be discriminated on. I'm going to just flip it. We talk, am I going too fast? Oh, sorry. There you go. Oh, sorry. Equity versus equality. We don't believe in equality. Okay? Equality is the picture on the left-hand side. The little short guy, he's never going to see over that fence. Equity is they get more. And now they can see over the fence. That is critical. In Canada, when we collect our tax dollars to send to the public schools, schools that have high language needs, high English as a second language, schools that are poor, in poor areas, they get more money. Why? Because those kids don't go home to computers. So we have more computers in the schools so that they will have access. We have clubs after school so they will have access. We bring in extra people so that there can be small groups of 4 and 5 students with a teacher to help them catch up. For us in Canada, it's more than just respecting diversity. It's raising the achievement of the lowest performing kids. So with the PISA scores, we know that between the highest performing students in Canada and the lowest performing students, the gap is narrow. And for all the countries that are at the top of PISA, that is true. That gap is narrow. How do you narrow the gap? You raise up the bottom kids. Now, some teachers have said to us, or some people have said to us, not teachers, if you just worry about the kids at the bottom, the kids at the top are going to suffer. Well, I hate to tell you, that's not true. What's happened, what our experience has been, is that the kids at the top go even higher. Why? We think it's because good teaching helps everybody. And when you're working with the kids at the bottom, it's good teaching. It's hard work. It's hard work. And as you're doing that kind of work that the professional learning communities was doing, that makes for just plain good teaching. The only thing on this slide I would say is you need to have a multi-pronged approach. If you just say, I'm just going to do it with the curriculum, or I'm just going to do it with policy, or I'm just going to do it with staffing, you'll get results, but you'll get better results if you do it all. If you can afford to, if you can, just do it all. Differentiated instruction. Again, something that means different things to different people. So some people talk about the modalities, about Gardner's work, having auditory, kinesthetic, visual learners. Yes, that's true. But it's a lot more than that. And again, I don't really have the time to go into that. All I can say to you is that if you were to go into the average, not all, but the average Ontario classroom on any day, you would see kids learning the same big idea, but in different ways. But I really want to emphasize this. You cannot, this is a personal opinion, you cannot throw out the content. Content matters, and it matters a lot in certain subjects. If you don't get certain things in mathematics, you're not going to get the next thing. They're foundational, and they build, and they scaffold. So to say content doesn't matter, I would take issue. Content matters a lot. But in the age of the internet, what content? If it's just searching for information, not so much so. But if I want to be a biologist, I need to know the difference between meiosis and mitosis, or I'm not going anywhere. I need to know what photosynthesis is. Now, I need to learn about it in an engaging way, because honestly, having gone through that at university, it can be deadly boring. I needed it to get me to where I needed to go, but it was not the most exciting thing I've ever done. Again, I really feel badly that I'm just skimming over this, but I am. One of the things I would do if I had more time with you, because our time is short, is I would ask you in groups, and this is something that you could do back home, to identify what are your 3 biggest challenges. What are your priorities? Because we've learned in Ontario, you cannot do it all. 2 things, maybe 3. That's it. For the year. If you try to do more than that, you're not going to do any of them well. So what is the most important thing? And it's based on your challenges. And then what I think would have been interesting is to put them up around the room and then just give you stars and to go around and say you have 3 stars. Put them where the challenges most reflect your challenges, to see where you as teachers from the Middle East, what are those common things that you're all facing? Now, I can guess what some of them are, but I'm not going to. And you might know them very well. But I think that might have been an interesting exercise. But it's also an exercise to do back in your schools, especially if you're principals, because it gives you a sense of where your faculty, where your teachers are. Should every teacher conduct research in their class? I would have to say yes. And in Ontario, I believe that is happening. I run courses for over 5,000 teachers every year. Okay, that's a lot of teachers. Some of the courses are strictly online. Some of them are in class like this. I don't deliver the courses. We also run courses for teachers who want to become principals, because in Ontario, you cannot become a principal unless you've taken 2 principal courses and done a practicum, where you do a real project that reflects what a principal would do, and a principal signs off that you have successfully completed it. In these courses that we run, we ask our teachers to look at the research and then make the application. That's doing research in your school. And I would ask you, where do you get your research? How do you know where the research is? It's a good question. Some of you might belong to professional associations. And if your English is good enough, there's some great associations out of the United States and England that you might join, and then you get their online or their mailed out journals. You can also just Google. You want to know about boys and literacy? Google it. That EduGain's website I sent you has a wealth of information. There are other places. So for people like me who like just exploring on the internet, go and see what you can find about the research around those challenges that you have. It professionalizes you as a teacher. I'll be honest, we've been in the Middle East, my colleague Elizabeth Reese-Johnstone and I, and the sense that we have is that teachers are not valued. I'll be honest. It's not just in the Middle East. We've heard that from Swedish teachers, we've heard it from Norwegian teachers, we've heard it from German politicians. Why are teachers not valued? That could be a whole day's discussion. one thing teachers need to do is they need to take ownership for their own profession. In Ontario, we have an Ontario College of Teachers. Teachers accredit the University of Toronto's program. They accredit my courses. They make sure my courses are good enough so that a teacher can get extra qualifications. If I do something very bad or very stupid as a teacher, I will be investigated by other teachers who potentially can take away my teaching license. That's the power that teachers have. And when we had some people who were visiting us from Jordan, from the QRTA, we walked over to the Ontario College of Teachers. There's a part of Toronto near the University of Toronto called the Mink Mile. So the Chanel, Armani, Prada stores are all there, okay? The places that people like teachers never shop. But it's wonderful to walk along and, you know, watch the world go by. So what did the Ontario College of Teachers do? They bought a building there. And they rented out most of the floors, but they're on the top floors. And they have a big sign at the top, OCT, Ontario College of Teachers. What does that say to me as an educator? Wow, my profession owns a building on Mink Mile, right? Yeah, on the Prada Street. There we are as teachers, okay? The other thing that teachers did in Ontario is they hired some very smart actuarial people. We have the best pension plan in Canada. So when I retired from teaching, this is a second career for me, I have a very good pension, an amazing pension. We fought to get that pension, the union. You know, sometimes we say, oh, the union's bad. Unions can be very good. They're good, okay? But what does that mean for me as a teacher? I feel proud. And when I look at the PISA scores, I feel proud. When I can say to a parent, this is why your child is struggling, and this is what we are doing to help your child, they have confidence. One of the things I used to do when I was a principal is I would go out and I would speak to business groups and I'd explain what we were doing and why we were doing it. It's the why we're doing it. Teachers need to reach out and not be insular, and they need to do action research. How am I doing for time? Okay. This is where I'm going to challenge you a little bit. I've seen thousands of teachers use this model where you identify the challenge, you look at the research, you form a question, and this is on the back of your handout. I'm going to give you an example of what this might look like. Here's something that around the world is a universal problem. Boys in schools are not reading at grade level and show little interest in reading. Okay? We also know that boys around the world are underperforming girls. Underperforming girls. We have more girls going to university in Canada than boys. Pretty much everything. Math is the one exception, but even in math, it's almost the same in terms of performance. Girls are outperforming boys in science in Canada. My daughter, who's in a science program at a university, wanted to have a boyfriend. I said, oh, you'll meet lots of boys. You're in science. She came back after her first lab. She said, Mommy, everybody in the lab was a girl. There were no boys. No boys. What is that? Anyway, we know that there's an issue with boys. So, if this is your issue in your school, you've identified the challenge. What do we know? This is some of the research on boys' literacy. Technology has a positive impact on boys' literacy. Boys read more and do better when you have them read from a computer than from a book. Boys do better with work-related and non-fiction texts. They don't like reading literature. They will read about how to build planes or some other non-fiction work. Boys have less interest in leisure reading than girls. If they go home, they don't want to sit with a book. They want to play sports or run around. So we know that. And boys lack male role models. So in our elementary schools, and I know it's different in the Middle East in terms of who teaches girls and boys, but in Canada, most teachers with young children still tend to be women. Yeah. So this is some of the research. Here's more research. Comprehension, the ability to understand, and to reflect and to learn from text is really important, and we need to develop it. But we also know the second point, this is from our government, that motivation to read is the essential element for actively engaging children in the reading process. It is the fuel that lights a fire and keeps it burning. Children need to be immersed in a literacy-rich environment filled with books, poems, pictures, charts, and other resources that capture their interest and make them want to read for information and pleasure. Okay, that's a lot of text to have on a PowerPoint slide. Very bad pedagogy to have so many words on one slide. Motivation's important. Okay, so we have the challenge. We've got some research. We also have this piece, prior knowledge and experience. In order that children may understand what they are reading, it's important that they come to the text with a variety of experiences that will allow them to appreciate the concepts. So for example, if I were to talk about a piece of literature that had to do with the Dead Sea, and no one had ever been in the Middle East, and I was introducing it in February in the middle of a snowstorm in Toronto, it's like talking about Mars, right? The kids would have nothing to relate to. Prior knowledge and experience is really important when you're looking at reading. That's just another piece of research. Okay, so we've looked at that, and there could be thousands more. The action research teacher then says, I'm going to create a question. If I, or if I'm in a professional learning community, if we do blah, 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 based on the research, then will boys read more? So what this means, the teacher would say, if I do whatever the blah blah is based on that research, would they read more? So my question is, if we develop rich prior knowledge activities before introducing reading material, then will all students, including the boys and girls, demonstrate a greater motivation to read and read more? So that might be my question. Now in Canada, we're all hockey crazy. I don't know if you know much about the game. Girls and boys put on skates, carry sticks, try to put a puck in a net, sort of like soccer on skates with a stick, with a weapon. Anyway, we're crazy about hockey. Most people, I'm not a big hockey fan, but most Canadians are. We have two Canadian teams that are famous. Toronto Maple Leafs, who never win. The Montreal Canadiens, who don't win that often, but they're also a very good team. Montreal is in the French-speaking part of the country. So the French Canadians, whose first language is French, not English, support the Montreal Canadiens. The people living in most of the rest of the province support the Toronto Maple Leafs. There are exceptions like Elizabeth's husband and me, but generally that's the case. There's a very famous book called The Hockey Sweater. And it's about a boy who lives in Quebec, the French-speaking part of the province. And he desperately wants a hockey sweater. So when he goes to play outside with his friends on the rink in the winter, he will be able to put on a sweater from the Montreal Canadiens. So he asks his mother and father for a hockey sweater. Christmas comes and he opens up his box, and yes, there's a hockey sweater, but it's the Toronto Maple Leafs hockey sweater. He can never go outside with that hockey sweater. He'll be laughed off the rink because everybody in the town, his parents ordered the wrong sweater. Okay, the story is a bit longer, but that's kind of the story. That's the kind of story that hooks the boys. And the way I introduced it to you would be somewhat similar to how a teacher might introduce it. Before they even start reading it, a lot of this, they might talk about this part of the story, and then there might be something like, what would you do if you were that boy? Okay? Talk in your groups. So now you're starting to look at problem solving, empathy, self-confidence. So it becomes more. And you might have within groups, you might say, put down some key words about how you feel for that little boy. So there could be 1,000,001 activities. And then after you'd gone some of this, then you'd say, okay, everyone, here are the books, go ahead and read. And if it was an ideal situation, you'd have laptops or iPads. I know this sounds crazy for you who teach 45 to 60 kids and you have nothing, but in Canada, where you might actually say, read from this technology. And then you would have some kind of active piece as a follow-up, okay? Where you might have them write a sequel, a part 2 to the story, okay? That's an example of how action research using prior learning might engage students. If we teach using nonfiction reading materials in class and provide nonfiction books to take home, then will boys read more in class than at home? One of the things we've done in Ontario around this, especially in areas where kids don't have a lot of money, we put books into bags and they can take them home, okay? And then they bring them back, because the parents don't even go to libraries and they don't have the money to buy books. But we think it's important that they have books to take home. Back to my example, if I was to do something with a, if we try this, then will something happen? I might devise a short interest survey that can be verbally administered. So I would say, okay, everybody stand up who likes going home to read, okay? And I'd count how many. Okay, thanks, sit down. That's my pre-assessment. It's very easy. Took me 5 seconds. And maybe after having done this a couple of times, you know, activating prior knowledge, I might now say, okay, everyone who likes to read when they go home, sometime before they go to sleep at night, stand up. And I'd count again. And if I got exactly the same number, I might think, okay, well, that didn't work very well, did it? And you know what I would say to you is, you can't be afraid of making a mistake. You can't be, unless you have a principal who's very difficult. But you have to be brave. And I use this example. Again, a Canadian example. We have lots of mountains, and we like to ski in the wintertime. If I can get down a small hill, okay, great, I can ski. But if I go to Western Canada, where we have mountains, and I've only been on small hills, what happens when I go on a big mountain? I'm going to fall down. I might hurt myself too, but I'm going to fall down. How am I going to get better as a skier? If I stay on those little mountains in Ontario, am I ever going to be a better skier? Never. I need to go on those big mountains, scaffolding up bigger, 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 and I will get better. It's the same for you as a teacher. You need to scaffold it up, right? You need to stretch, stretch, stretch. If you're not stretching, you're not going to get better as a teacher. I'm not going to make you work on this. I was going to have you work on this too, but I challenge you. Go back and find a challenge you have and see if you can do something. If I try this, will it make a difference? That's the plan. Does this model seem easy to you? Be honest. Put your hand up if you think it's easy to do. Okay. No, but doable. Okay, but doable. You know what? Education, teaching, and learning is hard work. It's all hard work. You know, if people think, oh, in Canada, they say, oh, you have 2 months off in the summer, you know, you get to go home early. No. It's hard work. Yeah, you don't go home early here. Yeah, good. Okay, our thinking on leadership. Leadership should be shared with everyone, including the students. We invite all voices to the table. We recognize and use evidence-based research. We reflect. We try to influence, motivate, and inspire. Learning is the work. We talk a lot about teaching. I've heard a lot about teaching today. In Ontario, we don't use the word teaching very often. We use the word learning. We are a community of learners. We're professional learners as teachers. We have to be intentional. We have to know what we're doing and why we're doing it. You have to be brave. There are times when it is really scary to be a leader. It's hard. You have to be relentless. The work is hard. You do not give up. Okay? You do not give up. You're like a dog with a bone is an expression we have in Canada. and you have to be a team member. Find a professional friend. And you know what? Be confident. You can really make a difference. I taught in this inner city school, and I can remember after I taught there for 2.5 years, a teacher came up to me and said, do you know so-and-so, one of my former students? I said, oh yeah, she's looking really good. She's lost weight and she seems to be happy. I see her laughing in the halls, because when I had her in grade 9, she was kind of overweight, quiet, sad, didn't seem to have any friends. She said, Evelyn, do you realize that after she was in your class, you changed her life? She was being physically abused at home, but you gave her the skills to be able to stand up to the abuse and to make a difference. And she has freed herself from that abuse, and she's become her own person. And I said, well, she never told me. She said, well, she's shy. She said, but in a guidance situation, in a one-on-one with another teacher, she shared how I changed her life. Well, you know what? To this day, and that was 35 years ago, it makes me realize how many stories do I not know? Do I not know? And I'm going to give you one more example of a teacher that can change a kid's life, and it's my own daughter's story. So we have 2 adopted children from China, 2 girls. And our eldest one is very academic. She fits a Chinese stereotype, good at math and science. Book, work. The other one, oh no, not so much so. Kind of learning disabled, artistic, fiery temper, didn't like school. She went to a Montessori school when she was 3 and hated it, and they weren't too happy with her. She walks into grade 1. She walks into a class with a grade 1 male teacher who fought apartheid in South Africa and had to escape with his family for his life. Goes to New York City. He's a scientist. He's a physicist. He decides he'll get a PhD in physics. Okay, he's smart. He's that far away from getting a PhD in physics. But he decides he loves young children, he wants to be a teacher. So he's finished all the coursework, but he says, forget the research. I'm going to Toronto, I'm going to teach little kids. My daughter had him as a grade 1 teacher. It changed her life. The first day she walked into class, he had made a tree of life out of paper and cardboard. Something like Christians in here make their Christmas trees, because in Canada we cut them down, but you don't have trees to cut down. But here you make them. Anyway, he had made this tree of life. And the kids all sat underneath the tree of life. The second day my daughter comes home, she said, I learned all about Adam and Eve today. So I said, yeah, we know that story in our family. She says, yep, I learned all about Adam and Eve and the start of the world and how God made the world. Second day she comes home, she says, okay, we learned about the Big Bang Theory today. That's how the world started. Okay, so he taught the 5 and 6-year-olds about the Big Bang Theory. The third day she comes home, I'm thinking, what's she going to talk about today? Okay, the native Aboriginal people have beliefs about how Gitche Manitou, God, the creator, created the world. So she came home with all the stories about how Gitche Manitou created the world from the native folklore. I thought, what's she going to come home with the next day? Well, that was the end of that, because then they started to do more traditional science programs. But he had hooked them. And doing this all underneath this tree of life, which became the tree that they had, the tree of knowledge, right? And on Valentine's Day, the Valentine's cards were all hung on the tree. This was not a Christian teacher, but at Christmas time, there were decorations on the tree. There were no Diwali believing students, which is an Indian faith, but for Diwali, there were lights hanging, because it's a festival of lights, all over the tree of knowledge. He inspired those kids to learn, and he changed my daughter, who was struggling, didn't want to go to school, was pretending to be sick every day, to a student when she graduated from high school, won scholarships that paid for her way to go to university. Okay, one teacher did that. And a mother who does a lot of work too. But I say that to you, I share those stories because you can make a difference. You may not always know it. It's invisible. You have such important work to do, and it is hard work, but you can make a difference. And I hope that this session has been a bit inspirational to you, and that you will leave walking out those doors believing that kids with the right time and the right support can do great things. Thank you so much.